Rajim. Bismillah Rahman Rahim. I welcome you to another session of my course Globalization and Development. The topic of my discussion is global environmental flows. In today's lecture, I will discuss the impact and effect of globalization on the world environment, and this topic will cover the role of industrialization, followed by the impact of colonization, and then followed by the role of modernization in creating different kind of environmental problems. This will be the first part of the lecture, and in the second part we will look into different mitigation and alternative strategies to improve the current environmental and ecological crisis faced by the world. And this include sustainable development, green technologies, uh, and better energy resources such as ethanol and solar energy, wind energy, which cause less carbon emission and which are carbon free. The emergence of industrial revolution in Europe during the 19th century was a big event. As you know, before that, most of the societies, human societies across the world were mainly dependent for their survival and existence on the agricultural produce or on the handicrafts, products made by hand, and then those products were exported to sold to different parts of the world. But industrial revolution, with the invention of industrial machines and the rise of the factory civilization, the production of finished goods that increased many times, and the energy which was moving the industrial machine was mostly the coal, and the introduction of coal powered engine in production of textile products in the early Britain during the 19th century, and in other parts of Europe such as Germany, saw the early emission of carbon into the environment. With the passage of time, this carbon emission increased, and we see that the world as it was on say 1817 AD, the world on the eve of 1970 was entirely different. Within 100 years, the environment, the ecosystem, the forest, the oceans, the rivers, ravines, the mangroves throughout the world depleted and decreased in many times. So, the industrial revolution and the industrial development and the consequent social and economic transformation which took place in Western Europe and in North America gradually started exporting and coming to the rest of Asia and Africa. Although the early colonizers, British colonizers, they brought certain productive units to Indian subcontinent, but that was on a limited scale. It was, you can fairly say that after the World War II, that the so called process of industrialization means that the machine oriented, factory oriented, instead of man oriented productive activity started happening and occurring throughout Asia and Africa. The industrial developments, the machines and the engines developed in Western Europe were then exported to other parts of the world. Now, what happened that people in Asian and African continents were not that much prepared, and they did not have that much technical skill and knowledge to operate those machines. Anyhow, these machines, this industrial uh, 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 achievement of the achievements and the industrial machinery of the Western Europe was exported to these regions, Asian and African countries, newly independent countries after the Second World War, and a process of industrialization started. Low manufacturing, then middle manufacturing machineries were established, and products, consumer products, and electrical goods, machinery, small machinery, and other products were being manufactured in India, in Pakistan, in Iran, and in other parts of Far Eastern countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, etc. The significant thing is that this industrialization, which took place in the developing and the newly freed countries of the colonial countries of the world, they were happened in a haphazard and unplanned way, unplanned fashion, and this caused a lot of environmental hazards in these parts of the world, in Asian and African countries. Although the industrial revolution has already caused pollution and depletion of forest and depletion of natural resources in the West European continent and in the North American continent, due to extensive mining, due to extensive oil and petroleum prospecting, due to extensive construction of dams on rivers, and due to extensive use of seas and rivers as dumping spots. Already the pollution was very high in the Western European hemisphere, but it started exporting and expanding into other parts of the world with industrialization, half baked industrialization in Africa and in Asia. Now, this because the people were less educated, ill prepared, so the affluents, industrial affluents, toxic waste, and other emissions were released into the air, into the water, into the earth unchecked, and this caused salinity and infertility in the land. This caused pollution in the rivers, river beds. This caused pollution in the seas, in the oceans, and this caused pollution in the air. But it was gradual, it was a period of, you can say, almost from, because industrialization particularly in the Asian and African continent started during the 60s, and then it multiplied in the 70s and in 80s. And it is within these 30 years that this environmental pollution and environmental crisis multiplied in the developing countries of the world. While the developed north, the developed countries of Western Europe and North America had industrial and environmental pollution and crisis of its own kind, and the problem in the developing countries also started rising. Different kind of diseases started appearing associated with the environmental pollution of air, from the diseases of the breathing diseases, pulmonary diseases, diseases of the kidneys, diseases of abdominal diseases, cancer, and lung infections. All these things started multiplying and increasing in the developing parts of the heart attack, etc., in different parts of the world, as they were also happening in the Western Europe. So, there was the reaction, and then similarly colonization, another important factor in creating the stress and strain on the ecosystem of the agrarian societies, agricultural age, because in the industrial age you need big lands, pieces of lands to establish factories and industries. So, deforestation started happening. Then there was the effluent, industrial effluent, chemical and other toxic effluent were released into rivers and seas. That became another source. The carbon emissions from the burning of coal, and then subsequently from the burning of the hydrocarbons, diesel, petrol, and other which were discovered during the 50s and the 70s, 60s and onward, with the growth and expansion of the automobile and the transportation sector, the consumption of oil and hydrocarbon increased many times. Rather, you can say the basis and the foundations. This is the lifeline of the modern national as well as global economy, the consumption of the hydrocarbons. The extensive use of these fossil fuels, the extensive use of the release of toxic and industrial waste into rivers and seas, and the extensive release of carbon into the air caused almost a problem which is now referred as greenhouse gas effect, which is now known as global warming and which is connected with the climate change. By that 2000, by the year 2000, the world was seriously threatened by the crisis of this climate change, global warming and greenhouse effects. The temperatures were increasing, particularly along the seashores. The marine life became endangered due to extensive dumping of toxic and industrial effluent into the sea, due to extensive atomic testing, sea, underwater testing of nuclear and atomic weapons, due to extensive testing of nuclear and atomic weapons underground and underwater, that radically altered the chemistry and the ecology of the sea, and it also affected the geological condition of the earth also, because major powers continuously doing underground testing, nuclear and atomic testing, and this caused this, you can observe that there is a heightened frequency of earthquakes throughout the world, there is a heightened frequency of tsunamis, there is a consistent and gradual warnings of tsunamis are issued, there is a unpredictable increase in the earthquakes throughout the world. So, this is connected with the underground nuclear testing, atomic testing, and underwater nuclear and atomic testing, and nuclear and dumping of the nuclear and industrial waste by the West, by the rich West in the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean has caused existential threat to the continuation of marine life, and the fish has declined throughout the world seas, and in certain cases it has become poisonous. Similarly, we have dumped tons and tons of plastic into the seas without properly treating them. It is now lately that we have come to realize that plastic should be properly disposed of and properly recycled, reprocessed. We have been mostly dumping the plastic either underground or into the seas, into the waters, deep sea waters. So, what happened? You will see often pictures and photographs of animals, whales eating plastic and dying, eating waste, and due to the consumption of toxic and industrial effluents in deep waters, in deep seas, Atlantic and Pacific and the Indian Ocean, three great oceans have been polluted, extremely polluted beyond recognition, due to which the marine life is highly endangered. Coral reef, in the Australian coral reef, that is extremely endangered. Similarly, in other parts of the Atlantic and Pacific and Indian Ocean, we see a declining and depletion of the fish and the marine life. Waterborne plants, waterborne shrubs, underwater shrubs and trees and underwater life is seriously threatened by industrial, nuclear, technological dumping and wasting into these waters. This release of effluent, toxic, industrial, chemical and other waste in the developing countries, it has gone unchecked. And what happened? Look at the great delta rivers, deltas in the Pakistani rivers. They have become riverines because of unchecked and untreated release of industrial and environmental pollutants into those rivers. Similarly, in India, Ganges and Jamuna has become extremely polluted because of untreated and unchecked release of industrial and chemical and toxic waste into those those two great rivers. Similarly, in Pakistan, river Ravi and river Satluj and river Chenab, they have become dumping spot by the industrialists. So, instead of properly treating and recycling those waste, they have been releasing. Then another cultural and social factor which was very important in creating the problem of environmental and imbalance of ecological system was the modernization, so called modernization. Europe was modernized during the 19th, 18th and 19th century under the impact of enlightenment, industrial revolution and reformation. Europe changed from a predominantly Christian and religious worldview to a secular and modern worldview, where rationality, objectivity and scientific spirit became supreme in guiding the, and personal responsibility became the guiding principle of the basis of modern human social and cultural life. That model was then exported to other parts of the world, and the underlying current of this modernity and modern concept of life was the concept of the conquest of nature, taming of nature, controlling the natural forces by one mean or another. So, what we see, that we see a flurry of activity throughout the world, where we see that big rivers, their water was diverted, large dams were constructed in order to produce electricity and irrigation. So, once you, no doubt, yet do you generate electricity and produce a lot of create and establish irrigation channels, canals to irrigate the land, but at the same time what you are doing is that downstream you are destroying the marine life of the river, you are destroying the underwater life of the river, you are destroying the flora and fauna on the banks of the river, and you are at the same time destroying the cultural and economic livelihoods associated with the river beds. Historically, from centuries, people have been living on the banks of the rivers, and their culture, their economy, their society, their traditions and rituals were connected with the flow of the river. And when those flows were stopped or either diverted or big large dams were constructed, that created an ecosystem crisis. Similarly, deforestation, expensive good wood was depleted, the cedar and the pine trees, they were cut from the high altitude mountains and sold into the markets of the world to make profit. So, this has caused a crisis in which now we find that the climate of the world is radically changing, it has altered. The weather system has become unpredictable, the air system has become unpredictable, the temperature is rising, the sea levels are rising, the Arctic ice is melting, the Antarctica is melting, the great glaciers of the world, Himalayas for example, and other glaciers of the world in Latin America, in Africa, in Japan, they are melting, fastly melting, and due to which the life downstream, the ecosystem downstream is greatly being influenced and affected. And it is not only affecting the plant and the animal life, it is also affecting the human life. What we see now, that due to the melting of the glaciers, that due to the erratic behavior of the weather and the air, we find an erratic rainfall, The rainfalls have become unpredictable. We find flash floods happening throughout the world, in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, in North America, we find flash floods very often. And then we find sudden, tsunamis appearing in the deep seas and affecting the people and the livelihoods overland. So, this modernization, so called modernization, this so called secularization, this so called progress as a material goal has badly affected and shaped and transformed the human society and the human culture in a way that which is now has become irrecoverable. The loss has become irrecoverable. Unless we change our social habits, our cultural practices, our economic and our political attitudes towards the environment, I do not see any improvement in the reduction of carbon emission. I do not see any improvement in the release of toxic and chemical effluents into the waters and into the sea. I do not see a cessation and stopping of the underwater and underground experimentation of nuclear and atomic weapons. And this, this modernization has caused then, because of depletion of forest resources, because of pollution of the air, because of contamination of waters, it has caused different diseases. The diseases have become globalized, these diseases have spread then throughout the world. Heart diseases, cancer, blood diseases, gastrointestinal diseases, they have become a perpetual another headache for the societies across the world. Now, we look at the mitigation and those strategies with the help of which the people throughout the world are trying to control this growing and expanding environmental and ecological crisis. Although there are, you will find people claiming that we can maintain a balance between ecology and economic development, so called ecological modernization theory, and you will find certain other theories which try to create a balance between the economy and the ecology, but it is not possible. It is at the sacrifice of one that you make progress in the other. Either you sacrifice the ecology to make an economic progress following the Western model of modernization and economic growth, profit making model, money making model, dollarized model, or you sacrifice your so called capitalistic corporatistic mentality and you preserve your ecology, you preserve your plant resources, you preserve your animal resources, you preserve your green resources, your forests, and you shift on a sustainable, you live a sustainable life and you try to tap the resources which are carbon free. So, the mankind has come to a point where it has to make serious choices. The people have proposed the paradigm of sustainable development and people have come up with the control idea of carbon footprinting, how much carbon a country is releasing, how much carbon a person is releasing in the air, carbon tax, environmental tax, etc., to mitigate the environmental crisis, but I do not think that they can do the enough. Large economies such as China and India and Brazil, for the last 30 years, they have contributed tremendous carbon into the atmosphere, which has caused serious biological and physiological threats to the existence of human societies, and which has caused serious diseases and serious illnesses throughout the world, diseases of breathing, diseases of heart, diseases of cancer. So, it is time, for example, they propose that we use solar energy, but how much and at what cost? Solar energy can serve as a sustainable way of life. Then this is, say, instead of using oil and petrol as hydrocarbon as a fossil fuel as a fuel for our, we should use ethanol or hydrogen fuel in the automobiles. But they might hydrogen extensive use of hydrogen might have some environmental implication. We do not know yet. Then they have come up with the electric solution of the electric cars. But man is not ready to revise and redesign their own. Human beings are not ready to revise and redesign and come out of this materialistic heaven, this so called materialistic, atheistic and this so called consumeristic world and society, which has taken away all the ethical and spiritual resources of the mankind away from it. And people are not ready to contain and people are not ready to limit their desires and the satisfaction of their desire. This is the crisis of global times, globalization. This is the crisis of modernization. The absence and the complete lack of religious, complete lack of spiritual and emotional values from the center of the human societies. Human beings are sensitive and highly spiritual creatures. And this is a proof that you can see that the great religions have and great spiritual traditions have appeared throughout the world, and they have given meaning and they have given direction and they have given purpose to the human life. But what the globalization is offering to the human beings? Nothing. Competition, greed, more exploitation, more profit making, more money making, more dollarization. There is no spiritual and there is no ethical cushion to this economic model of growth. And then there is a limit of this economic growth. How much we are going to exploit the mountains, how much we are going to exploit the rivers, how much we are going to exploit the oceans, how much we are going to exploit the air, how much we are going to destroy the ecosystem, how much we are going to deforest, destroy the plant and the flora and the fauna, how much we are going to divert the river systems, rivers flowing from one country to another country. The country which is located upstream diverts the entire river. By what logic? By what law? How can you stop and divert the course of rivers who are flowing for the last 5,000 years, 6,000 years, at time immemorial? Those rivers have been flowing on the earth. And now here comes a petty nation state, here comes a petty society, and they, in order to fulfill their certain economic and social need, they divert the whole river. Look at the case of India and Pakistan, what the Indians have done to the flora and fauna and ecology of downstream Punjab, Pakistani Punjab. The entire Punjab has turned into a desert because they have diverted almost 3 rivers into the Indian Punjab. Similarly, look at the Nile river. Ethiopia is trying to claim, it has never claimed this river. Now they are establishing their claims. They want a share of water, and they want to, and that Egypt is trying to build dams on those rivers, river Nile. Similarly, look at the Amazon. What has happened to those forests along the Amazons? Brazil has done a huge deforestation in order to do progress and establish industrial machines and plants and factories. That has destroyed the Amazon forest, and that is polluting and contaminating the Amazon river. Then building dams on the Amazon river, diverting the water. There is no natural, no legal and no moral ground of diverting the river systems wholly. You can utilize run of the river. A country, if a river flows through 3-4 countries or 2 countries, both the countries have equal right on the water shares. Similarly, this decline in fresh water, decline in the marine life, decline in pure food, and this the rise in the use of genetically modified food has caused serious economic, serious social, serious health problems for the human societies throughout the world. And idea of sustainable development and idea of a green society and green technology is not enough, because the more we try to control the problem of environmental and ecological destruction with the invention and introduction and innovation of new technology, the more we complicate this problem. If you analyze, you need to analyze it in a more dispassionate and in a more objective way, and you have to see that the time has come where we have to cure and care for earth instead of exploiting and prospecting its resources. Over mining, over diversion of rivers, over mining, diversions of river, over utilization of land, reduction of farmland, release of toxic and chemical and industrial waste into the rivers, into the water, fresh water. Where are we heading? We are heading towards a total ecological and environmental disaster. And if we do not change our habits, and if we do not change our ways of living style, we do not, this globalization will become a problem. And already the signs of exhaustion and signs of over extension of globalizations have appeared. The recent crisis of this novel coronavirus has shown it, that how this free movement, borderless movement of people has. Then this environmental crisis has another, the conflict zones. I just forget to mention conflict and war zones throughout the world. Look at Afghanistan, look at Iraq, look at Syria, look at the immigrants in the European trapped on the borders of Greece and Turkey. Look at the Rohingya Muslims, look at the Kashmiris, look at the Palestinians. The continuous 40 years, 50 years, it is a story, post-war phenomena of suffering, post-war phenomena of genocide, post-war phenomena of killing the Muslims, has caused a scar on the face of modern civilization and has caused a serious questioning of the rule-based and internationally equitable and just world order, has caused aspersions and questions on the legality and the validity of the United Nations and institutions. There is no way out, and this has also caused a burden. The millions of Afghan refugees in the northwestern and southern hemisphere provinces of Pakistan are living, and they have destroyed the flora and fauna and the land. They have transformed and changed it beyond recognition. Not only they are suffering, but the local population is also suffering. Why? Because of a war, because of the Soviet Union in 79, from 79 to 89, the Afghans suffered. Then here comes the United States of America. America invaded Afghanistan in the name of terrorism, and it has destroyed the rest of the Afghanistan, carpet bombed, totally finished. Nothing is left in Afghanistan. Nothing grows in Afghanistan except bombs and missiles and guns and bullets. This is what is left. Look at the Rohingyas, they have been genocided by the Myanmar, by the Burmese army, under the very proponent and ideal of democracy, Aung San Suu Kyi, promoted and symbolized by the West, protected, funded by the West. What they have done? Millions are now living as refugees, and millions have been, and that has been recorded by the NASA and by the Western satellites. Village after village have been burnt. People have been burnt alive just because they are Muslims. Similarly, look at India. What India is doing to its minorities, to Christians, to Sikhs, to Muslims. Similarly, in Pakistan, you find instances of forced conversions of Hindus to Islam and other minorities. You have no right. Let the people live, they want to live, they want to believe, let them have their own beliefs. No one has the right, and no religion forces that you implement or that you force people to follow a particular religion, change their beliefs by force, by authority, by power. No, neither Islam nor any other religion. This is immoral, unethical. So, the problem of conflict and war zones, the world has to look into it and has to stop, has to see the cessation of hostilities and the killing of human beings, unnecessary, uncalled for killing in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria. This is a humanitarian crisis, and the world has to realize it and to stop it. So, this has also caused a lot of damage to the environment. How we are going to mitigate it? That needs to be seen, and you need to reflect on these issues. Conflict zone, war zones, carbon emissions, dumping of waste into seas and release of waste, toxic and waste into rivers and riverines, deforestation, they are all interlinked, and they are linked, they are substantiated and supported by the so called idea of modernization, the idea of progress, that you can make heaven and you can bring establish prosperity. There is a limit. I do not agree, I do not disagree that you should not struggle for prosperity, economic growth. Yes, do it, go for it, but within certain boundaries and limits. Do not trample the earth, do not exploit it beyond recognition, that it become irrecoverable. So, this is how all these ideas are substantiated by a misguided and false theory of progress and modernization. It has given legitimacy to an unbridled and uncontrolled exploitation of natural resources, which has caused the problem we are right now facing. So, this is a moment of reflection, and this is a moment which calls for changing our habit and lifestyle to make globalization less painful and to make a world a place of live and a common heritage of mankind. Thank you very much.